Well, let me ask a follow-up question on exactly what you just said, and to get a little bit more to the substance of what you've been referring to as a general breakdown crisis. As you know, while the government has been shut down, Obama chose to meet with none other than the top CEOs from the big six Wall Street banks in the White House, including Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan and Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs. And while this meeting was called to ostensibly discuss the debt ceiling, we know that the two foremost issues on Wall Street's mind are, number one, their utter fear and loathing of Glass-Steagall and the fight that we are leading on this, on Glass-Steagall, and number two, their insatiable addiction to quantitative easing bailout funds. And last week, you commissioned a leaflet to expose the truth about this hyperinflation in the price of basic goods that Americans depend upon since the repeal of Glass-Steagall and since 9/11. And this is the product of that. Wall Street is out to kill you with hyperinflation. And you can see the charts that we put together. Our research showed that since September 11th, Americans have seen prices of the basic goods needed to sustain human life double, if not more, while their incomes have been collapsing. That is, if you're not in the upper 1%. And you made the point at that time that it's necessary for the American people to recognize that the suffering that they've experienced is not unique to them. They're not isolated in this suffering. But in fact, they are experiencing a condition that practically the entire American population is experiencing as well. And only by doing this can you objectify the crisis and coalesce the type of solidarity that's necessary to unify the population and moralize them enough to fight. Now, on the question of a general breakdown crisis, as you've made the point, this is not just a depression. You're dealing with a scientifically defined idea of a general breakdown crisis where there exists no solution within the parameters of the current system. And I think the debate over QE is an example of that. It's whether you accelerate or taper, it's a true damned if you do, damned if you don't. On one hand, you're going to have sudden hyperinflationary explosion. On the other hand, you'll have an implosion of the entire system. And it's only by introducing a factor from outside those parameters that you can possibly solve the crisis. And as you've said, that factor is Glass-Steagall, accompanied by Hamiltonian credit. So I'd like to ask you to address these two topics a little bit more. One, the necessity of creating the sense of shared solidarity among the American people to moralize them enough to fight. And number two, to elaborate a little bit more on this scientifically precise idea of a general breakdown crisis per se.
You've got a complicated process here because on the one hand, you've got the people generally know they're being swindled, but they don't want to say so. They're afraid of reprisals against them. Now, in many of the crimes which have been committed against the United States government and against our constitutions, that's been the problem. That we have more and more of the population is terrified, and therefore they will not squawk, they will not resist. And when people walk over them, they hate it, but they're afraid to say so. And so this is the key problem we have to deal with. What we need is you need fighters, and not fighters in terms of street fighters, but fighters in terms of the mind. You need people who will actually say this is a fraud. The evidence is there. Well, what they will do, they'll say, that's over the top, that's over the top. And when you hear somebody saying, that's over the top, you know they're a freak. They've just gone wild. They are no longer have their minds pulled together. But you see that phenomenon out there. And when somebody says it's over the top, you know he's crazy. And dangerously so. Because they become violent. And the characteristic is, that's over the top becomes a violent expression. that means they know that they're lying, but they know they better lie, otherwise somebody will take it out on them. And if you take the number of assassinations and things like that that have occurred in the United States, increasingly over this period of time, say 9/11, the cover-up of 9/11, these things are crimes. You had the British Empire, with its institutions, and the Saudi guy who was, at that time, was the Saudi representative, ambassador to the United States. And he was involved directly in 9/11. The whole operation was 9/11, was that. So as a result of this process, our people are more and more frightened. And they will say, they show their fear in violent expressions. Like what happened on this case. We had a couple of people caught in the police crossfire. And that's fear. That leads to fear, and fear causes it. But the problem is that this juggernaut, which is being pushed by Obama and by his British masters, this is the thing that's terrifying the population, and this is where the issue where we need, with ourselves, to make clear what this whole thing is. And there are two things. First of all, if you talk about monetarism, if you talk about monetarist assumptions, anybody who espouses monetarism or monetarist standards, so-called financial standards, which are monetarist standards, they are incompetent and should be recognized as that. And simply say, they are incompetent. What Obama is pushing is fraudulently incompetent. He's a fraud, and he's incompetent, and he's a liar. So therefore, the problem is the mission, you've got to do something about this. Right? The mission is, we've got to put the power over the United States government in the hands of the people of the United States, and by the kinds of people who are real leaders in the United States, who can exert the kind of leadership necessary to give confidence to the other people in our population. Look, they've been stripped of everything. Since the cancellation of Glass-Steagall, they've been stripped of everything. Their jobs, there are no longer any real jobs in the United States. There are no industrial jobs in the United States, to speak of a few handfuls of them, sprinkling. People don't have a job. They don't have the income to maintain themselves as they were. They're poor compared to their parents and so forth. So therefore, we face a point where we have to provide confidence and leadership. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. And that's what's wrong with most of our people. They may smell the truth, but they don't want to know they can even smell it because they're afraid of what might happen to them if they indicate that they are being dissident. That's our problem. Now, I particularly know more about economics than probably any of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, for that matter. And there are solutions for this thing. Go back to our principle, Glass-Steagall. But understand, this time, really understand Glass-Steagall. Under Glass-Steagall, we just do Glass-Steagall, put it through now, and put it through not as a money system, but as a credit system. People have tried to use it as a money system. Bill Clinton, for example, tried to use it as a money system. It has to be used as a credit system. And people don't know what a credit system is. So that's something we're going to have to worry about.